Hello, everyone. My name is John Sierra, and I'm a Tolkien scholar. And welcome to my channel. I'm a Tolkien scholar, and I have been for a very long time. And that basically means that I'm the kind of guy that you can come to with any sort of question about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, whether it's The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, The Silmarillion, anything else really, or questions about Tolkien himself. We have one of those today, actually, that was quite interesting to answer. So, people do ask me occasionally about Tolkien as a person rather than his works himself, and you'll see that today. I'm going to try to be as brief as I can, not so much with the answers, but with the intro here. And the reason is because I'm not feeling very well today. I have a very bad migraine, and despite taking what I would describe as copious amounts of medication to help deal with it, it really hasn't helped at all. And I almost decided not to record this, but I figured I really want to keep the schedule up, and also that I usually just have a great deal of fun doing this, and it'll keep my mind off my migraine, if even for a little bit. I've also been rather stressed out. Some of you who might be on my Discord or have come by my streams know about this, but I've been having some issues with my computer recently. I'm having to replace the what's called the GPU, which is the graphics card, and I've already purchased the new card, which came at great expense. But it's not going to be here for a while. It hasn't shipped yet, and it won't for a bit. And the earliest that I could possibly get it is actually a week from today, when I'm recording this. Not exactly when you're seeing it. If you're a channel member, you're seeing it the very next day. But anyway, it's really just the fact that the computer that I'm doing this all on is aging and needs to be replaced, and it's an expense that I can't quite meet just yet, but will hopefully soon if this all continues to go well. And I'm trying to think if this is the first part to be put in the new one, but will temporarily be used in the current one, because the microphone might actually be picking it up right now, but the noises that it's making is pretty stressful to hear, the squeaking and the occasional grinding. But anyway, not to get bogged down too much. If you have a question for me, you can leave me a question in the comments, and I will answer you in the comments. If you want to be answered in a video, there's two ways to do that. There's on Quora, which Quora is a knowledge-sharing website where you can ask a question and have people answer who have relevant knowledge or expertise or experience. And if you ask any sort of Tolkien question on there, it's going to suggest that you ask certain people, and I'll be one of them. I'll be at or near the top of the list. There's a link to my Quora in the description. Or you could use the YouTube community tab, which there's a little video showing how to use that. It only works on mobile. Keep in mind, though, I want you guys, because I've got a lot of questions through there, which I think is absolutely great, but keep in mind, just think to yourself for a moment, is this a question that needs to be addressed in a video, or is this a question that could be answered like really quickly? Because a few of them I'm like, well, that's really just, just a real quick answer. And so if I answer you in a comment, that would mean that I feel like, okay, it's an interesting question. I'd like to answer you, but maybe I can't fill up time with it, But anyway, that being said, we'd like to do a reading here, and I'm going to read from The Two Towers today. And, by the way, subscribe and all that. I'm not feeling well. I want to get through this. So I'm going to read from the chapter The Window of the Past, specifically the part where Faramir is going to sit down and talk with Frodo and Sam and really have a discussion with them for the first time. And, Faramir is going to sort of tell them who he is and what he's all about. And there's a little bit about Gandalf here and all his different names, and that's relevant to one of the answers, one of the questions and answers later. So I'm going to read you a bit of this. Faramir is one of the most interesting characters in the book. So here we are. There was nothing for Frodo to do but to fall in with this request or order. It seemed in any case a wise course for the moment, since this foray of the men of Gondor had made a journey in Ithilien more dangerous than ever. They set out at once, Mablung and Damrod a little ahead, and Faramir with Frodo and Sam behind. Skirting the hither side of the pool where the hobbits had bathed, they crossed the stream, climbed a long bank, and passed into green-shadowed woodland that marched ever downwards and westwards. While they walked as swiftly as the hobbits could go, they talked in hushed voices. "I broke off our speech together," said Faramir, "not only because time pressed, as Master Samwise had reminded me, but also because we were drawing near to matters that were better not debated openly before many men. It was for that reason that I turned rather to the matter of my brother, and let be Isildur's bane. You were not wholly frank with me, Frodo. I told no lies, and of the truth all I could," said Frodo. "I do not blame you," said Faramir. "You spoke with skill in a hard place, and wisely it seemed to me. But I learned or guessed more from you than your words said. You were not friendly with Boromir, or you did not part in friendship. You, and Master Samwise too, I guess have some grievance. Now, I loved him dearly, and would gladly avenge his death. Yet I know him well, Isildur's bane. I would hazard that Isildur's bane lay between you, and was a cause of contention in your company. Clearly it is a mighty heirloom of some sort, and such things do not breed peace among confederates, not if aught may be learned from ancient tales. Do I not hit near the mark?" "Near," said Frodo, "but not in the gold. There was no contention in our company, though there was doubt which way we should have taken from the Emyn Muil. But be that as it may, ancient tales teach us also the peril of rash words concerning such things as heirlooms." "Ah, then it is as I thought. Your trouble was with Boromir alone. He wished this thing to be brought to Minas Tirith. Alas, it is a crooked fate that seals your lips who saw him last, and holds from me that which I long to know. What was in his heart and thought in his latest hours? Whether he erred or no, of this I am sure he died well, achieving some good thing. His face was more beautiful even than in life. But Frodo, I pressed you hard at first about Isildur's bane. Forgive me. It was unwise in such an hour and place. I had not yet had time for thought. We had had a hard fight, and there was more than enough to fill my mind, but even as I spoke with you I drew nearer to the mark, and so deliberately shot wider. For you must know that much is still preserved of ancient lore among the riders of the city that is not spread abroad. We of my house are not from the line of Elendil, though the blood of Númenor is in us, for we reckon back our line to Mardil, the good steward, who ruled in the king's stead when he was away to war. And that was King Eärnur, last of the line of Anarion, and childless, and he never came back. And the stewards have governed the city since that day, though it was many generations of men ago. And this I remember of Boromir as a boy, when we together learned the tale of our sires and the history of our city, that always it displeased him that his father was not king. How many hundreds of years needs it be to make a steward a king, if the king returns not, he asked. Few years maybe, if in other places of less royalty, my father answered. In Gondor 10,000 years would not suffice. Alas, poor Boromir. Does that not tell you something of him? It does, said Frodo. Yet always he treated Aragorn with honour. I doubt it not, said Faramir. If he was satisfied of Aragorn's claim, as you say, he would greatly reverence him. But the pinch had not yet come. They had not yet reached Minas Tirith or become rivals in her wars. But I stray. We in the House of Denethor know much ancient lore by long tradition, and there are moreover in our treasuries many things preserved, books and tablets writ on withered parchments, yea, and on stone and on leaves of silver and gold, in divers characters. Some now can be read, and for the rest, few ever unlock them. I can read little in them, for I have had teaching. It was these records that brought the Grey Pilgrim to us. I first saw him when I was a child, and he had been twice or thrice since then. The Grey Pilgrim, said Frodo. Had he a name? Mithrandir we called him in the elf fashion, said Faramir, and he was content. Many are my names in many countries, he said. Mithrandir among the elves, Tharkun to the dwarves, Olorin I was in my youth in the west that is forgotten. In the south Incanus, in the north Gandalf, to the east I go not. Gandalf, said Frodo. I thought it was he, Gandalf the Grey, dearest of counsellors, leader of our company. He was lost in Moria. Mithrandir was lost, said Faramir, and evil fate seems to have pursued your fellowship. It is hard indeed to believe that one of so great wisdom and of power, for many wonderful things he did teach us, could perish, and so much lore could be taken from the world. Are you sure of this, that he did not just leave you and depart where he would. Alas, but yes, said Frodo, I saw him fall into the abyss. I see that there is some great tale of dread in this, said Faramir, which perhaps you may tell me in the evening time. This Mithrandir was, I now guess, more than just a lore master, a great mover of the deeds that are done in our time. Had he been among us to consult concerning hard words of our dream, he could have made them clear to us without need of messenger. Yet maybe he would not have done so, and the journey of Boromir was doomed. Mithrandir never spoke to us of what was to be, nor did he reveal his purposes. He got leave of Denethor, how I do not know, to look at the secrets of our treasury, and I learned a little of him, when he would teach, and that was seldom. Ever he would search, and would question us above all else concerning the great battle that was fought among Dagorlad in the beginning of Gondor, when he whom we do not name was overthrown. And he was eager for stories of Isildur, though of him we had less to tell, for nothing certain was ever known among us of his end. Now Faramir's voice sank to a whisper. But this much I learned or guessed, and I have kept it of a secret in my heart since Isildur took somewhat from the hand of the unnamed ere he went away from Gondor, never to be seen among mortal men again. Here, I thought, was the answer to Mithrandir's questioning, but it seemed that a matter that concerned only the seekers after ancient learning. Nor when the riddling words of our dream were debated among us, did I think of Isildur's bane as being the same thing, for Isildur was ambushed and slain by orc arrows, according to the only legend that we knew, and Mithrandir had never told me more. So, there we have it. So the interesting thing, well, there's a lot of interesting things there, but the part that's relevant to what we're going to be talking about a bit later is really about Gandalf's words regarding his names, and he has all these different names, and they have all these different meanings, Mithrandir, for example, is Grey Pilgrim. Gandalf is Wand Elf. Tharkun is Grey Man. Incarnis is Northern Spy. Olorin is well, I usually say it's Dreamer, because it's related to Olos, which is to dream, but it's not specifically glossed, so I think as a name it would probably be, He Who Dreams or Dreamer. But the way that he says Olorin in my youth, of course, Gandalf is older than the universe itself, he's not just immortal, he's eternal, he's an angel, so it's really interesting for him to use that exact phrasing and to say in the West that is forgotten, which is really interesting. And we're going to talk about specifically memories and how Gandalf's mind works as opposed to how it did as Olorin a little bit later, when we answer one of the questions. I also find it really interesting that he was a teacher to Faramir, although of course Faramir was a little bit like Pippin, and I think that's why partly why Faramir and Pippin bonded so well. Pippin even named his son Faramir when the time came. And, Faramir took, which is not that unusual because a lot of the Tooks had the sort of names that would not really be all that unusual in Gondor. I mean, Pippin, is just a nickname. His real name is Peregrine, son of Paladin, So, if you look at it like going from Paladin to Peregrine to Faramir, it's not really all that unusual that he would name his son that. He only had the one child that we know of, which was Faramir Took. They were very close, and I think they're a lot alike in that they're looking to Gandalf for, to sort of be a mentor and a teacher, and Gandalf's sort of like, well, maybe a little bit, Anyway, guys, like I said, I'm not really feeling too great today. I'm having a rough go, mentally and physically, so we're just going to roll right on through with the questions. So let's get to your first question. Our first question comes in by the request of Ace Gang, who asks, how long did Sauron wield the ring before his defeat, and did he do anything notable with it? Nailing down how long Sauron had the ring is pretty easy, actually. Sauron forged the ring in 1600 of the Second Age, and he lost it after being defeated by Elendil and Iranian Gil-galad. Elendil's son Isildur cut the ring from the Dark Lord's finger, who taking it for himself. Isildur took the ring from Sauron in 3441 of the Second Age. So Sauron had the ring for 1841 years. He also had the ring on his person at all times during this, even when he went to Numenor. Now, though the text of the Silmarillion seems to suggest that he left the ring in Mordor when he went to Numenor, Tolkien clarified this in letter 211. I'm going to give you an excerpt from that. Sauron was first defeated by a miracle, a direct action of God the Creator, changing the fashion of the world when appealed to by Manwë. See Part 3, page 317. Though reduced to a spirit of hatred born on a dark wind, I do not think one need boggle at the spirit carrying off the One Ring, upon which his power of dominating minds now largely depended. As to what Sauron did with the One Ring, Tolkien was also clear that though he allowed the greater part of his power to flow into the ring, he was stronger when he wore it, and when he was separated from it, he was not diminished. The most notable things would be, the creation of the Nazgûl, who were men that he gave rings of power to and dominated permanently into his service. They were not mercenaries or soldiers or slaves. They were his servants forever. They were unable to conceive of a will not of Sauron, even when they acted independently from him. The rebuilding of Barad-dûr seems to have been done using the power of the One, as well as the tower crumbled fully after the ring's destruction, as all things made with the ring passed away. And I know you might wonder in this, well, he didn't have the ring at that time, but like I said, he was not diminished when he was separated from it. So while he could not use its power to dominate others, he still had access to his general power, which existed, most of it existed within the ring. All right, let's move on to the next question. Our next request comes in from Time Lord Guy, and here's his question. Hope this is not an obvious question, but who was the messenger who went to Dane Ironfoot? Was he really the mouth of Sauron, or another Nazgûl, or a human emissary of Sauron? It's a good question, actually, and this is one of those things that we aren't told clearly. But we can make a very educated guess. I can surmise strongly that it was not a Nazgûl that appeared at Erebor, and I think, in fact, that it was the mouth of Sauron, and we're going to get to the evidence here. The text describing the messenger of Sauron does not mention him being a horseman, or does, I should say, it does mention that he's a horseman. It mentions that he has a voice that would have been sweetened if he could sweeten it, and that his breath was like the hiss of snakes, and that all who stood by shuddered. And this does seem to point in that direction, that he may have been a Nazgûl, but there are a lot of indications that it could not have been one of the Nazgûl. For one, the horseman is not described as cloaked or shadowy in any way. This seems like it would be pretty pertinent information for Gloin that he would have given there. Another big indicator is his use of the name Sauron, which the Nazgûl do not use at any point. The only one of Sauron's minions to be allowed to use that name in parley was the Mouth. We don't know for sure if this messenger was the Mouth of Sauron, or if he was another similar emissary, for example, a Mouth of Sauron, but it seems that the Mouth is the guy that Sauron sends out when he wants diplomacy with a little hint of malice, while the Nazgûl are more like blunt instruments. Furthermore, we know a lot about the movement of the Nazgûl thanks to the Appendix and Unfinished Tales, and their timeline doesn't mesh. We know that in June of 3018, the Nazgûl were occupied by the taking of Osgiliath, and that it was not until after this, in July, that they set out to find the One Ring. So we should consider that they were not searching for the ring at any point prior to July. They set out north of Rohan from the Wold, which could, if they kept going and then turn east, lead them to Erebor. But what is directly north of the wold? The Gladden Fields, which is the most likely place where the ring would be found. Saruman had also been looking in this area, as it was well known to be where Isildur was killed. But of course, the ring had already been, recovered and passed into the hands of Gollum by the time that Saruman started sniffing around. The Nazgûl returned to the wold empty-handed in September after 2 months of searching, which, you could say, well, that might have given them enough time to go to Erebor and back. But here's the part that I think really throws a spanner in the works. In the wold, in September, they met with a messenger from Sauron who gave them their next directive, which was Isengard. This does indeed tell us that Sauron had other non-Nazgûl messengers and emissaries that were out and about at this time, and we also must think about hierarchy. While the Witch King was Sauron's most fearsome servant, he wasn't exactly his second in command. We are told that the Witch King was in charge of Minas Morgul, and Gothmog was his lieutenant. The Mouth was said to be the lieutenant of Barad-dûr, essentially meaning that the mouth of Sauron answers directly to Sauron and that he's the second in command in the Dark Tower. Since Sauron is filtering messages down to the Witch King, and the Nazgûl are they're not really known to attempt to bargaining or bribery, as the messenger that came to Erebor offered 3 rings of power and dominion over Moria and Sauron's friendship in exchange for, Bilbo's location. I can conclude that it was almost certainly the mouth of Sauron who told the Nazgûl to lean on the White Wizard, and also told him that that he's no friend of Sauron. Saruman, of course, didn't actually give the location of the Shire, but Grima Wormtongue did. They waylaid him and terrorized him when he traveled on the road, and from there they went straight to the Shire. So, while there are 2 months unaccounted for where it is possible that the Nazgûl may have come to Erebor, there's an important passage that makes this very unlikely. I'm going to read you that passage. Heavy have the hearts of our chieftains been since that night. We needed not the fell voice of the messenger to warn us that his words held both menace and deceit, for we knew already that the power that has re-entered Mordor has not changed, and ever betrayed us of old. Twice the messenger has returned and has gone unanswered. The 3rd and last time, so he says, is soon to come before the ending of the year. So this tells us that Dane successfully stonewalled the messenger for quite a long time, and that the messenger came back 2 additional times and will come back 1 last time before the end of the year. Now, if we go back to Gloin's words earlier where he said that the first visit was about a year ago. So if we're taking this to be, well, he's, somewhat exact here. The Council of Elrond is being held on October 25th. This would mean that the messenger came to Erebor for the first time around October of 3017, and then returned on 2 occasions after giving Gloin, months of time to mull over the offer, and promised to return a final time before the end of 3018. This, to me, just doesn't jibe with the thought that the Nazgûl were dispatched on their mission in July of 3018. My guess is that Sauron, he had been adopting a carrot part of his plan for a while, but now it's not working, so he's going for the stick, and that's why he deployed the Nazgûl to look for the ring. But he had the mouth most likely doing it already in a much, calmer and nicer fashion, and and so the mouth of Sauron, in that sense, he's the carrot, and the Nazgûl are the stick. And this fits with their MO. They don't go around offering rings, they don't offer friendship, they don't offer lordship of Moria. They burst in and they say, open in the name of Mordor. They're an instrument of terror. So the fact that it just can't logically have been the Nazgûl, coupled with the fact that the messengers did indeed, the messenger, I should say, there was only one, did indeed use the name Sauron, and sometime between visits visited the wold to give orders to the Witch King, tells me that, very strong surmise would point to the messenger being none other than the mouth of Sauron. All right, let's move on to the next question. Our next question comes in by the request of Matt Tyree, who asks, here's a tongue-in-cheek question in the realm of surmise. What would Manwë think Sauron would do if the ring was destroyed, given that neither he nor Sauron assumed that it would result in Sauron's destruction? Again, what would Manwë think that he would do? Well, let me clear something up real quick. And no one would think that destroying the One Ring would destroy Sauron. It didn't work that way. Sauron was not destroyed, and he couldn't actually be destroyed. He was and remains bound to Arda, that is the earth, as any other of the Ainur are. The Ainur are the angels. And he's an angel. He's a fallen angel, but he's still an angel. A large portion of Sauron's power was destroyed, leaving him very, very weak, so weak that none could ever foresee him returning to power. That being said, the thoughts of Manwë are an interesting exercise in conjecture. I think if anyone within the circles of the world would know for sure what the destruction of the ring would be for Sauron, I think the likes of Manwë and some of his contemporaries, such as Ulmo and Namo, who possessed the greatest foresight. It was, after all, specifically Manwë that made sure that Aloran, that's Gandalf, was included in the Astari, which is the wizards. I would also give a respectful nod to Varda as well, because she recognized Gandalf's importance and that he was not the third of the wizards. Even though he was chosen as the third, he was the third chosen, but she didn't see him as the third in importance. After Tarandor, which is Saruman, and Alatar, which is Merenatar. Seeing as how it was Gandalf who contributed the most out of the wizards to the destruction of the One Ring, I would state that Manwë and Varda and possibly some others knew that he would be instrumental in making this happen. Yavanna had some faith in Saruman, but she sent Radagast to humble him, which was a fruitless endeavor, while the other two concentrated more on weakening Sauron's war effort from within, rather than concerning themselves with the ruling ring. So I would state that Manwë, just based off of this, I think he knows what Sauron's state would be. As to what he thought of this, or what Sauron would do in this state, I would say that, knowing his personality, and I mean Manwë's personality, I think he would be saddened that such a great being, such as, Mairon the Admirable, would be reduced to such a state, regardless of the fact that he had become evil. I think Manwë tried to look on the bright side of things. We see that in a lot of passages. And I think he would have some empathy for Sauron. And I think that, he would also have empathy for his teacher, Aula, who had to have hated seeing his students go awry, because, Saruman was also his student and Feanor was also his student. I think Manwë would pray for Sauron's redemption, and he would hope that, being made truly helpless for the first time and in such a permanent way, that Sauron might find the humility to finally sort of just let go of his desires and his urges. Sauron's whole issue was that he could never let the world just be. He always saw a way to make things better, and he was a meddler. He totally lacked the ability to actually meddle after the One Ring was destroyed. So I think at this point he would either fall into despair and bitterness and maybe lose his mind, or perhaps over time he would come to see that the world just, is doing fine without his meddling. Manwë would pray for the latter. He never really wanted to believe that anyone was really beyond redemption. To be irredeemable is kind of a crazy thought. And, he would certainly hope that Sauron doesn't continue to become more like Melkor, which was, Manwë's brother, who was cast from the world. So there you have it. That's my thoughts on that. All right, let's move on to the next question. Our next question comes in from Tali, who asks, was Sauron truly diminished enough that Shelob was truly a danger to him, or did he just believe that it was so? I don't know where you're coming from on this one. There's no indication that Sauron ever thought of Shelob that way. I'm not sure where the idea came from that Sauron would think of Shelob as a threat. I don't know where that comes from. Whether or not she was a threat to him is not ever established. It is true that her mother Ungoliant proved to be quite a threat to Melkor, but in a very specific instance where Melkor was weakened and Ungoliant was strengthened. Shelob established herself in Mordor, or I should say the land that would become Mordor, before Sauron ever came there, and he was certainly aware of her. Sauron referred to Shelob as his cat, as he did feed her. Pickings were pretty slim for Shelob in the late Third Age, especially that she considered orcs to be, sort of junk food. So the fact that Sauron would execute captives that he was done with by driving them into Shelob's lair was mutually beneficial for them both. Sauron did not wish for Shelob to leave the area, which became known as Cirith Ungol, or Cleft of the Spider, as it was a weak point in the natural fortifications of Mordor, but Shelob made a naturally excellent guard against invaders, even though she was not intending to be his guard. Shelob and Sauron probably never met. He just fed her like a stray cat, as he wanted her to stay where she was, and the orcs, they sort of knew to stay away from her because she would eat them, even if she didn't think they were very good food. There is no indication that Sauron thought of Shelob as a threat to him personally. He just had no reason to ever go near her. All right, let's move on to the next question. Our next question comes in from Norma, who asks, did Gollum's evil side come from his grandmother spoiling him as a young hobbit? No, his evil side came from the One Ring. Smégol was bad, but he was not evil, and this is an important distinction. He was described as worse than Déagol, who himself was described as a mean little soul. Essentially, they were troublemakers and ne'er-do-wells. But they were also pretty young, and it is possible that if not for the tragedy of finding the One Ring, they may have matured over time and become better people, or not. Either way, it's probable that the way that Smégol was raised had a big impact on the way that he carried himself, but he was never more than just a dirtbag before suddenly the malice of the One Ring poured into him, and pretty soon he killed Déagol. We have good reason to believe that Smégol actually felt very badly about his actions. He repressed the memory of it, insisting to Gandalf that he got the ring from his grandmother, who had many such magic rings. Of course, Gandalf knew that was a lie, and he got the truth out of him. But Smégol was not merely just lying to Gandalf, he was also lying to himself. Even his true name was a repressed memory. He had been Gollum for so long. Now, the One Ring doesn't turn a truly good person evil, but it can affect a good person. For example, Bilbo. Bilbo lied a lot more to his friends after he got the One Ring, and though he wound up doing the right thing with the Arkenstone by giving it to Bard and Thranduil, the fact that he pilfered it without Thorin's knowledge to start with, before Thorin started even acting crazy, was something that Bilbo knew was wrong, and he rationalized it in the same way that Gollum rationalized his actions. So that being said, Gollum he's not off the hook, but the One Ring made him evil. We've seen that people of his same race can resist becoming quite evil, or I should say they can resist being evil quite well. The ring had just so little to work with in regards to, say, Samwise, that all it could offer him was being the greatest gardener in Middle-earth, and he even rejected that. Gollum, as a hobbit, he didn't have great ambitions. He just wanted to eat fish and be left alone, so the ring couldn't turn him into anything more than just this nasty creature that eats fish. He committed some acts that could be described as atrocities, but even with the knowledge of everything, Frodo still chose to forgive him in the end. He did bad things, but he did destroy the One Ring, and he had a much longer and more terrible life than he ever would have had if he had never come across such a thing. All right, let's move on to the next question. Here's another question from Norma, who asks, did Gandalf remember being a great spirit, and did he forget once he was reincarnated? So the wizards, they had their memories somewhat limited, and they did know though, what they were. We know that they know they were what they were. There are two indications that tell us that Gandalf and the other wizards had limited memories of their past so as to help them focus on their mission. But that they still knew exactly what they were. The first is the speech that Gandalf gave at the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, where he told the Balrog that he was a servant of the secret fire, which is him identifying himself as an Ainu spirit that is aligned with Ilúvatar, not with Melkor. The second indicator that Gandalf knows exactly who he is would be the fact that he remembers his true name. And this is why I read the Faramir part earlier. Olorin was his real name, and that he told that to Faramir, who repeated it to Frodo and Sam. Gandalf refers to his time in the West as his youth, and that the West was forgotten. This is heavily suggesting that while Gandalf knows that he is of the Ainur, and he knows he came from the West, and he knows what his mission is, he doesn't necessarily remember everything that he did in the West. Gandalf the White would not have forgotten either, as he did spell out his mission directly to Denethor when he said the following. But I will say this, the rule of no realm is mine, neither of Gondor nor any other, great or small, but all worthy things that are in peril as the world now stands, those are my care. And for my part, I shall not wholly fail of my task, though Gondor should perish. If anything passes through this night that can still grow fair or bear fruit or flower again in days to come. For also I am a steward, did you not know? The steward of Middle-earth, not to rule, but to tend to Middle-earth and to take care of Middle-earth. He also mentions that he was sent back for his mission was not complete, and that he went beyond time and memory, meaning that he left the world as a mortal would, but that he was sent back by Ilúvatar. He tells Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas that he will not speak of the road that he took, but that he is back. He does seem to be a little bit addled at the moment, because he only remembers the name Gandalf once it is said to him. Yes, that was the name, I was Gandalf. That was his exact words. Having gone to the timeless halls, where there is no linear time, we really don't have any idea of how short his stay seemed to be. To him, it might have been a moment, it might have been an eternity, and I think that he felt that like he was gone for a really long time, which is why he doesn't immediately remember the name Gandalf. He was a Loren for thousands of years. He was Gandalf for a smaller amount of time, and the first beings that spoke to him, when he was awakened in the world, was Gwaihir and Galadriel, and Gwaihir didn't really say his name, and Galadriel, of course, she would have called him Mithrandir. Gandalf was one of his favorite names, and it was likely just, sort of sitting on the tip of his tongue as he collected his thoughts before Aragorn said it out loud. It would almost seem in that moment that he would remember his time in the West more than his time in Middle-earth, but of course he doesn't have perfect recall. Gandalf's time is, his mind, I should say, it's more organized than most people's minds are, especially mine today. My mind seems very disorganized today. But he's forgotten more things than I'll ever know or that you'll ever know. And sometimes he needs rest, or he needs solitude, or he needs pipe smoke, or the words of a friend to sort of just jog his memory. We saw this at the Gates of Moria when he credits Merry for helping him remember how to open the door. Sometimes he needs input from others to dredge something up, but he never really forgets who he really is. All right, let's move on to the next question. I didn't mean it to be this way, but here's the third question in a row that comes from Norma. And this is a really good question, so I really wanted to answer this one. Did the Corsair people have a civilization like their ancestors? Also, did they worship Melkor? So really what you're asking is, did the Corsairs of Umbar have a culture? And really no, the Corsairs of Umbar weren't really a specific people. the Corsairs of Umbar appear in The Lord of the Rings in the scene after, Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas and Elrohir and Elladan and a group of Dunedain of the north, that is to say rangers. They take the paths of the dead, and along with the earthbound spirits of the Oathbreakers, they come to the Bay of Pelargir. And this ghost army is unleashed on the Corsairs, who are filled with terror and mostly drown themselves in the bay. The Oathbreakers dissipate from the world, and Aragorn and all the aforementioned characters free the slaves on board the Corsair ships, and they use the ships to sail up the river to join in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. But who were the Corsairs, really, other than just some men who aligned themselves with Sauron? To understand this, we're going to have to just go through the history of the land called Umbar. Umbar, in Quenya, means fate. However, in Appendix E, it is stressed that the name of the region is not related to the Quenya word. Umbar is an old name, and the region was named that since before Númenor had even come to the area. And the meaning was lost and forgotten. Regardless of this, when Elendil made his realm, it included, or I should say it eventually included, the land of Umbar. It is hinted that the first Númenorian to come to Umbar was Tar Aldarion, who explored the vastness of Middle-earth in his many voyages, both before and during his rule. It is also stated that Númenor, under Aldarion's rule, settling in these regions, is what prompted Sauron to initially choose the naturally fortified land that would later be known as Mordor as his region. Aldarion's great-great-granddaughter Tal Tarperion had successful wars against Sauron, which kept him, away from the coasts for quite a long while, which prevented his incursion into the lands that surrounded Mordor. However, this was not to last, because then Telperion's son Tar Minastir was, in Tar Minastir, he was sort of the last good monarch of Númenor. All the subsequent kings and queens after that, they wound up becoming greedier for power, and they started subjugating the peoples of Middle-earth. So at this point, Númenor is starting to slide into evil, but they're not yet aligned with Sauron, and even the more evil monarchs still kept him at bay, and Umbar was an incredibly important region from a strategic standpoint as a major port. So in the book, The Peoples of Middle-earth, it said that Sauron was just unable to conquer Umbar at this point. Tar Minastir really had a good foothold there, and then, even though those that came after him were not great people, they still were great warriors and great at fighting, and strategic. They just weren't great people. So Umbar, at this point was the landing spot where the last king of Númenor, Pharazôn, successfully marched his men into Mordor and accepted Sauron's surrender, and they took him to Númenor as a prisoner. And we all know how that happened, And after the Akalabeth happens, that's the fall of Númenor, Elendil made his realm and became, the first High King, with his son Isildur being a lesser king in the north, and his other son Anarion becoming a king in the south, a region that came to be known as Gondor. So Umbar was not yet included as a part of Gondor, but it was a realm that wasn't known for its loyalty to Elendil, because the king's men, they were sort of a splinter faction of Númenorians. They were later called the Black Númenorians. They were the first ones who settled in Umbar. Now, of course, Elendil had other issues on his plate at this point. Sauron's pretty angry that though he destroyed the land of Númenor, or at least, goaded them into being destroyed by God, his hated enemies, the faithful, still persisted and were now making quite the foothold in Middle-earth. So going forward, two Black Númenorians, these two guys named Heramor and Fuinor, became these local warlords of Umbar, and they became leaders of the men of the south, the Haradrim, and they fostered ill relations with Gondor. Sauron, of course, he winds up losing the war. He flees to Mirkwood, though the loss of Elendil and Anarion was a big blow to the faithful. The death of the new High King Isildur and 3 of his sons wound up fracturing the realm. Arnor and Gondor become separate nations, and that weakens them both. Though it would be some time before Sauron would become a threat again, many of his minions fled to the south and to the east, and it also became common for exiles and criminals that fled Gondor to settle in Umbar. So it wasn't until Gondor was on their 13th king, whose name was Eärnil, that Umbar was finally assaulted by Gondor in great force. And the wars with Umbar lasted a really long time. It wasn't until Eärnil's grandson, Ciriahur, was the king that Umbar was conquered and then became a part of Gondor. It was called South Gondor, with Ciriahur taking a new kingly name, Hiarmendakil, which means South Victor. However, as Gondor weakened through plagues and depopulation and constant wars with enemies, including Sauron, the Haradrim and the Wain Riders, all this is going on. During the reign of their 20th king, who was named Valakar, suddenly there were rebellions because Valakar was getting old, and some of the men of Gondor refused to believe that his son, Eldacar, would become king. They weren't going to accept Eldacar because he wasn't born in Gondor, which, imagine what these sort of foolish people would think of Aragorn, due to the fact that their queen was not of Númenórean descent and their prince was born out of the country. They thought of him as this foreigner who's going to have a lesser lifespan. He's not going to be a good king. And so there was a civil war known as the Kinstrife, where Eldacar's cousin Castamir deposed him, and then he took the throne, and then he himself was deposed by Castamir, who'd returned from exile with an army of men from the north, from Arnor and Ravanian, and the war continued against Castamir's sons, and the sons fled to Umbar. So Castamir's sons took charge of Umbar, and they seceded the region from Gondor, and they declared it an open haven for any and all enemies of Gondor. Due to the Bay of Pelargir being between Gondor and Umbar, the battles between the two were almost entirely naval battles. So the enemies of Gondor would go and they would pillage other regions for their resources, so they became these pirates, the Corsairs of Umbar. So it wasn't until the reign of Aragorn that Umbar was pacified and became a part of Gondor once more, and in the interim, they happily joined with their old enemy Sauron if it meant troubling Gondor. So the Corsairs are a hodgepodge of the descendants of Gondorian rebels, the descendants of Black Númenóreans, the Haradrim, criminals, exiles, and just a haven for anyone who is against Gondor. So that being said, they didn't really have a unified culture other than we just hate Gondor. To address the idea of Melkorism surviving in Umbar, it is not something that Tolkien ever wrote about, but it is possible. But there's a caveat that though Melkorism in the Dunedain, it started in Númenor with the Black Númenóreans and everything, but the king's men, they were the first practitioners of Melkorism. But Sauron at this point was claiming that he was Melkor incarnate, so that, if they were worshiping anyone, they were actually worshiping Sauron, if they were keeping up this practice at all. All right, let's move on to the next question. Our next question comes in by the request of Josh Creveling, who asks, what was Tolkien's role in the Great War? So I mentioned in the intro that, yes, I do answer questions that aren't about Tolkien's work, but about him himself. Tolkien was largely a communications officer, and he was known to bond with his men. That's the short version. Now I'll give you the long version. It was quite a shock to his relatives that he joined the military once war broke out. No one he knew expected him to do such a thing. Tolkien hints in letter 43, which was to his son Michael, that while it was mostly born out of it just being a thing that, lads his age did, or else be seen as cowardly, it was also born out of his frustrations. Tolkien was very much in love with Edith. But due to his father figure, Francis Morgan, who was a Catholic priest, he was forbidden to marry her or even become engaged to her until he turned 21, even after she converted to Catholicism for him. This left him with a few years in which he was quite frustrated, and being separated from Edith led him to become a bit of a layabout and a troublemaker in his first year of university. He enlisted as soon as he could, and in his own words, I'm going to read you an excerpt here, "In those days, chaps joined up or were scorned publicly. It was a nasty cleft to be in, especially for a young man with too much imagination and little physical courage. No degree, no money, fiancé. I endured the obloquy, and hints became outspoken from relatives, stayed up and produced a first and finals in 1915. Bolted into the army, July 1915. I found the situation intolerable and married on March 22nd, 1916. May found me crossing the Channel. I still have the verse I wrote on the occasion, for the carnage of the Somme." He deferred his enlistment until he finished his degree, and then he joined the British Army as a second lieutenant. His regiment was infantry, the Lancashire Fusiliers, a regiment even older than the United Kingdom, as they were formed in 1688 under the banner of the Kingdom of England. Tolkien did not enjoy his military service. He had to endure nearly a year of training, and he stated that he thought of his superiors in training as not gentlemen and as barely even human beings. It was during this training period that he finally married Edith. Tolkien knew that the outcome could be very grim for him, stating that the mortality rate of junior officers was high, and parting from his wife, he felt like he had, already died. Tolkien's assignment wound up being a signals officer, meaning that he was in charge of army communications, which he found to be very boring. Due to his boredom, he started writing poetry and continued working on his constructed languages, including a special cipher that only Edith understood that informed her of where he was at all times, but by which the enemy could not track him if his letters were intercepted. Tolkien wound up really liking the enlisted men that served under him, but it was considered improper at the time for him to be too friendly with them, and he found his role as a superior to be distasteful. He stated that bossing them around in such matters as having the job of censoring their letters was improper, though he took the opportunity to bond with his men by inspiring them as much as he could. When Tolkien was sent to the Somme, at this point it seems very grim, the mortality rate was extremely high. His wife Edith stated that she feared every knock on the door could bear ill news. However, there was a horrible thing that happened that wound up being a really good thing for this young couple. Tolkien's regiment was beset with an infestation of lice, and he became ill with trench fever, which is normally a very minor malady, but in this case, it was serious enough to put him in the hospital, and this took him off the front lines and out of harm's way. Tolkien did not escape the horrors of war fully. In the time he spent at the Somme, many of his friends were killed, and he was said to by his children to have spoken very rarely of this time, but when he did, he always stressed the horrors, and he never attempted to glorify his service in any way. When he was in the hospital, he was able to be with Edith, and he penned the first version of Beren and Luthien and the primitive version of The Fall of Gondolin, as well as starting on his epic The Children of Húrin. The character of Tinuviel, which was later renamed Luthien, was directly inspired by a memory of Edith dancing for him among flowers shortly after he was promoted to first lieutenant. Tolkien later reflected that the rigid social structures of enlisted men and commissioned officers was thrown out the window once they were in the trenches, and that he gained an appreciation for the Tommy, meaning the lower class, low-ranked soldiers that came from humble backgrounds. His illness was very long. John Tolkien was actually born during the time that he was still recuperating. His promotion was meant to be temporary, but he wound up maintaining it. When he was discharged from the service in 1920, he was still first lieutenant. British lieutenant. Tolkien obviously didn't relish this time of his life, but he did relish the lessons that he learned and the bonds that he formed. He spoke poorly of his superiors in training, but he spoke highly of his inferiors on the front. He never spoke ill of the military in general, And his son Christopher wound up following in his footsteps because he joined the Royal Air Force, and he served during World War II, attaining the rank of flying officer. Another of Tolkien's sons, Michael, he joined the army like his father, and he had a sort of a similar arc. He deferred enlistment until he finished his degree. Christopher actually put his degree on hold and then finished it during his downtime. And Michael was also stationed abroad, and he moved from second lieutenant up to first lieutenant before he left the service, although Michael was an anti-air gunner. But he had a similar arc to his father. No trench fever, though, because there wasn't a lot of trench warfare in World War II. But there you have it. Let's move on to the next question. Here's another question coming in from Matt Tyree, who asks, what do you surmise was the birthday gift that Déagol gave to Smégol that Smégol felt so dissatisfied with? And I like this question. I really like this one. This is one of those things that there's no definitive answer, at least not from Tolkien. Of course, we can come to a strong surmise using the fact, but the reality is that we'll never truly know what that birthday present was. Most of the facts that we know about Smégol's birthday present comes from one of Tolkien's letters. Specifically, it was letter 214, in which the astute reader A.C. Nunn asked Tolkien about the incongruity between Smégol expecting and receiving a gift on his birthday, with the reveal that Smégol and Déagol were hobbits, who Tolkien had established earlier in the book gave away gifts on their birthday rather than receive them. Now, Tolkien explained that the idea of hobbits giving away gifts on their birthday, that's a Shire custom, while Smégol's clan did not live in the Shire. They did at one point in the past, but they found the life there to just not be to their liking for an unspecified reason, so they remigrated back to their point of origin to lead a more primitive life. And just to clarify, I'm not saying that Smégol himself lived in the Shire. I'm just saying that his people at some point before him lived in the Shire. The Shire is a lot older than he was. Tolkien never says exactly what it was about the Shire that this clan of Sturs did not care for. The fact that it comes up in a discussion about birthday customs, though, it leads to me believe that they just probably didn't enjoy that custom. Perhaps they wished to make their birthdays about themselves. It is possible that the custom was new and they wished to go back to simpler times when you would receive things on your birthday rather than give them away. Tolkien also clarifies that hobbits of even the Shire do in fact both give and receive gifts on their birthdays. They receive gifts from their very close kin, and they give gifts to their further kin and their friends and their neighbors. And Bilbo didn't have any close kin. The closest were cousins like the Sackville Bagginses, who really don't like him, and Frodo, who is his first and second cousin once removed either way. So he's a rich hobbit, he's a generous hobbit, so he gives away a ton of gifts. Gifts are usually also given upwards, meaning from younger to older, usually from a child to a parent, and Bilbo didn't have any children to give him gifts. That being said, we are told that while Smégol and Déagol were not exactly evil characters at this point, we talked about this earlier, they were sort of just ne'er-do-wells, they're troublemakers, they're the mean-spirited type, they're bullies. Tolkien describes Déagol as a mean little soul who begrudged having to give Smégol a gift, and Smégol is even worse, and he doesn't appreciate the gift, thinking that he should have gotten something better. This is framed as his excuse for wanting the ring that Déagol finds. Of course, as Gandalf once pointed out to Saruman, only one hand may wear a ring at one time. The one ring poured on the malice and made the two hobbits fight, and a stronger one won. Smégol, though, he's not entirely evil. He needs an excuse in his head to justify the murder of his friend and the fact that he felt entitled to a better gift than the one that he received. That sort of lays the groundwork. We see the result of this in The Hobbit as he refers to the ring as his birthday present, and he keeps repeating that to himself. The murder of Déagol is described by Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings as a repressed memory that he had to draw out of Gollum. So what was the present that Smégol thought was not good enough? We cannot know, but perhaps the context of his actions may give a hint that we can surmise from. I think that the fact that the two were stewing in their grudges while fishing on a river, it gives us the thought, perhaps It was the fishing rod that he was using. And I can sort of picture Déagol, he's the smaller of the two, and he thinks, well, if I have to give my friend a gift, which I really don't want to, that he's making me do it, at least it should be something good, and then they can go fishing together and sort of get away from it all. And then Smégol, he's thinking he's going to get something, better, and perhaps maybe when he got the fishing rod, he couldn't hide the disappointment on his face, or maybe he just openly said, hey, that's not good enough, man. And Déagol, perhaps he's annoyed at this point as to how unappreciative Smégol was, insists, well, let's go fishing right now and maybe you won't think it's so bad. Or it could have been anything. That's been my thought. All right, let's move on to the last question. Our final question comes in by the request of Quora, who asks, was Andúril truly powerful or just symbolic because of Aragorn's heritage? It was both. It can't be overstated that the importance of Andúril was mostly symbolic, as it was a sword broken into two pieces and then repaired, much as the realm of Elendil was broken into two realms, Arnor and Gondor, and it would be reunited by the return of a king. That isn't to say that Andúril is not a very powerful sword, but its symbolic meaning is made clear almost, the moment that it's introduced. We know that it was once called Narsil, and it was given to Aragorn by Elrond on his 20th birthday. Aragorn carried the sword with him in its broken state until he came to Rivendell with the ring bearer, and it was reforged and renamed Andúril. I'm going to read you a passage here. The sword of Elendil was forged anew by elvish smiths, and on its blade was traced a device of 7 stars set between the crescent moon and the rayed sun. And about them was written many runes, for Aragorn, son of Arathorn, was going to war upon the marches of Mordor. Very bright was that sword when it was made whole again. The light of the sun shone redly in it, and the light of the moon shone cold, and its edge was hard and keen. And Aragorn gave it a new name and called it Andúril, the flame of the west. However, before this we have Gandalf's letter to Frodo, where he tells Frodo to seek a man named Strider, but to be aware of impostors. And I'll read you an excerpt for there. P.P.S. Make sure that it is the real Strider. There are many strange men on the roads. His true name is Aragorn. All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall the blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king. While Gandalf doesn't mention directly that Strider carries a broken sword, he identifies him by his true name and includes a poem which we later learn was written by Bilbo. This poem tells you a lot. Aragorn is gold even though he does not glitter, meaning that his appearance is rough, but he is kindly and a good friend. He is a wanderer, but he is not lost. He is old by the standards of the men of Middle-earth. He's 87 years old at this point in the story, but he is strong and he has not grown cold. He is rising from the ashes in that he is the return of a lost line, a light returning after many years of darkness. And then we get to renewed shall be the blade that was broken, the crownless shall again be king. It is shortly after this that Frodo and Merry and Pippin just sort of immediately accept that this is the true Strider. But Sam, he's not entirely sure. He asks for proof that he means no harm, and then, well, maybe you killed the real guy and you took his stuff. And Aragorn tells Sam that if he wanted to harm him, he already would have. And then suddenly, in a seemingly threatening manner, he puts his hand on his sword while glaring at Sam. And Sam, then he laughs and just sort of reiterates that he is the real deal. A bit later, he produces the sword, even saying to Sam, hey, look, it's not much of a weapon in its current state. So going back to the passage where Narsil is reforged and renamed, we're told a lot. There are spells, runes inscribed in the blade, and that has 7 stars on it, which is associated with both the Valar and with Númenor, and we get a description of how it catches light. And there's also the inscriptions of the moon and the sun, that's Isildur and Anarion there. There are many times in the story where we get descriptions of Andúril as this brilliant white flame cleaving through enemies. Of course, some of the results are because Aragorn's just a really good swordsman, but he also has a great weapon. In the Two Towers, we get a hint at what some of those runes may signify, as Aragorn warns Hama that anyone who is not the heir of Elendil touches the sword, it would be very dangerous for them. He also states that it was forged by Tel Char in the deeps of time. In The Hobbit, we got quite a bit about how powerful the elvish weapons forged in Gondolin were, Glamdring and Orcrist being the elvish swords used by Gandalf and Thorin, and even Bilbo's sword, which was named Sting, seems impossibly keen and strong. But Telchar, however, was not an elf. He was a dwarf, and the dwarfish craft in weapons was even greater than the craft and weapons from the elves, and the deeps of time refers to the First Age, when the dwarves were at their height of their abilities and their prowess. So it was a very, very powerful sword. All right, that was our last question. So now it is time that we review the quizzes from the past week. Okay, so let's review the quizzes from this past week. There actually wasn't a quiz today because I accidentally put 2 of them up tomorrow. I scheduled them all ahead of time, and I guess I put 2 on the same day. But there are still 7 quizzes here. So here's the first one. Which of these is not the name of one of Samwise's children? Now, if you guys have watched the whole video, you know the answer because I mentioned it earlier when I was talking about Faramir and how similar he is to Pippin, and how Pippin named his son Faramir. So the correct answer here is Faramir. The other answers, Bilbo, Frodo, and Pippin. Sam did name 3 of his sons, Bilbo, Frodo, and Pippin. However, he did not have a son named Faramir. That was Pippin's son, Faramir Took. 29% of you guys got that right. It seems the plurality here went for Bilbo, but no, there was a Bilbo Gardener. Moving on to the next one here, who was the first character in The Lord of the Rings to speak about Morgoth? And this is interesting because I gave this quiz to Sid, and I gave this quiz to Matt, and they got it wrong. So this was just a tough one, I guess, because nobody got this right. Well, 18% of you got that it was Aragorn. Legolas is the only person in The Lord of the Rings to say the name Morgoth, but that's why I was very careful in my wording here to speak about Morgoth. Gandalf speaks about Morgoth, Elrond speaks about Morgoth, but the first person was actually Aragorn when he was with the hobbits. He told them the story of Beren and Luthien, and he referred to Morgoth as the Great Enemy. Okay, here's our next one. Which kingly name did Elrond's brother Elros take when he became the first king of Númenor? And as you can see, the majority of you, at 56%, got Tar Miniatur, absolutely correct. Tar Miniatur means the first lord. The other choices were Aldarion. We talked a little bit about Aldarion earlier. He was the one that sailed all over the place. And then there was Tarkalion is actually the Quenya name of Ar-Pharazôn. It means the golden. And Tar Palantir was the king before Pharazôn, who, was supposed to pass the scepter on to his daughter Miriel, but then Pharazôn married her and took the scepter by force. Here's our next one. Which of the following does the word Amroth not refer to? The king of Lothlorien, a lord of Gondolin, a region in Gondor, or a scrapped character that was meant to be the son of Galadriel and Celeborn? And I'm happy to see that while it's pretty spread out, the plurality here, 39% of you did get this one correct. The king of Lothlorien was named Amroth. He drowned in the Bay of Pelargir, and there were no kings of Lothlorien after that. That's why Celeborn is called the Lord, and Galadriel is called the Lady. They're not the king and the queen. There is a region in Gondor called Dol Amroth, which is named after him. And there was an Amroth that was a scrapped character. It was going to be Galadriel's son, that he was removed and sort of replaced with the version that was the king of Lothlorien. There's also a hill in Lothlorien called Amroth, and Prince Imrahil named his son Amrothros, which means the terror of Amroth. But nobody in Gondolin, as far as we know, was named Amroth. There was no Amroth mentioned in the First Age. Okay, here's the next one. I thought this one was very, very easy. I'm surprised you guys didn't quite get this one. How many meals a day do hobbits eat if they can get it? Was it 5, 6, 7, or 8? And I expected that more people might go for 7 because that's what they said in the movies. But I'm surprised that anyone really went for 5 or 8. I'd say the answer is 6. It is breakfast, second breakfast, luncheon, afternoon tea, dinner, and supper. Now, when they say 11sies, that's actually second breakfast. It's the same thing. And it's not that Peter Jackson was making a mistake. He actually knew that 11sies and second breakfast were the same thing. He just thought it would be funny if it was said as, oh, hobbits are just squeezing one more meal out of it. And that he was right. It was pretty funny. And here's our next one. Which of these races of people are never mentioned to smoke? Elves, men, dwarves, or hobbits? And this is really great because the vast majority of you got this. Elves are never mentioned to smoke. Men, of course, smoke. Aragorn is mentioned to smoke. Dwarves are, of course, also mentioned to smoke. And hobbits, they invented it. So, yeah, of course, they invented smoking. So, of course, they're mentioned to smoke quite a bit. Elves don't smoke, and it's kind of, Legolas kind of even mentions that he thinks it's weird that anybody would do such a thing. And here's our final one. I thought this one was really difficult, and I guess it is really difficult, but which of these characters was the first to call himself the King of Rhovanion? Rhovanion is, of course, Wilderland, which is the northern lands of Middle-earth that is east of the Misty Mountains, so just sort of including Mirkwood and Dale and Erebor, and sort of like the desolation of Smaug and the surrounding area there. So our choices here were Vidugavia, Girion, Eorl, and Fram. Vidugavia was the correct answer. He never really united the land of Rhovanion. He just called himself the King of Rhovanion. Girion was the last Lord of Dale. He wasn't a king. He was a lord in Rhovanion, but he was not a king of Rhovanion. Eorl the Young was one of the kings of Rhovanion, but this was quite a bit later, and then he, of course, became the first king of Rohan. And then there was Fram. Fram was just the guy who killed Scathe the Worm. I thought I'd just throw his name in there because he had a similar pedigree to these others. Anyway, guys, that has been the video. I hope you've enjoyed the questions and the answers, and I hope you've enjoyed the quizzes and all that stuff. And I am feeling very tired, and I'm in pain, and I'm stressed out. But it's been worth it to really sit here and talk about this stuff with you guys. So please subscribe to the channel if you haven't at all yet, and consider membership because that really helps me out, especially since I'm going to have to pay for a new computer soon. So that's going to be a big, big expense, and yeah, I'm working hard at this to try and make some extra money. So consider membership, and if you can't do that, that's great. Just, like I said, like the video, leave me a comment on the video, send me some questions, and we will see you guys next time.